Hello and welcome to another episode of Binocular Insights. My name is Russell. I'm here with Southwest Optics here in Torbay in Devon. Now today we're going to cover a little bit of a subject that is not necessarily very often discussed and a little bit of a how-to guide with getting the best out of your binoculars, and that is the topic of depth of focus as opposed to depth of field. So let's just clarify what those two terms are first, shall we? So depth of field is very much the depth of the distance with which something remains sharp at whatever power binocular you're using. And typically it's the case that less is better, as in lower power provides you a greater depth of what remains in focus from where you're looking out to infinity. So maybe, for example, a 7 times power binocular will start with a very close near focus all the way out to infinity. And in fact, infinite or focus-free binoculars just usually are very low power, and that's why they don't need any focus, because the whole scene is sharp in focus. But as you go up in power to an 8 power binocular, for example, the depth of focus, the scene depth of what is sharp or perceivably sharp, is a little bit further away from you out to infinity. And then that depth gets a shallower and shallower slice, but further and further out, the higher the power you use. So a 10 power will have a narrower slice of what's in focus further away from you than an 8. And a 12 similarly will have a shallower depth of focus than the 10, but gives you the power and the reach further out than the 10 or the lower power optics. So it's always that trade-off. That's a little bit about depth of field, but what is depth of focus? Well, depth of focus isn't what happens in the field. Depth of focus is what happens in your eye or the eyepiece of the optic you're looking through. And that actually is relating to how sharp the image remains no matter how far you move forward or back from the eyepiece, or the range of sharpness that you have as you adjust your focus. So it's what you end up actually seeing in the eyepiece. Now this is important because when you buy a high-end binocular, you don't necessarily get to appreciate all the work that goes into the design of maintaining a high quality depth of focus, and that's very much a design choice by the designers. What eyepiece system will they use? How many lens elements are in the whole optic system? How much spacing is there between those lens elements? Is a field flattener lens used? How wide is the optic using as an eyepiece piece of glass at the outset? So all design conscious decisions that the designer will take into account when working out the overall size of the binocular and its overall feel. And generally speaking, the longer the eyepiece, then the greater the depth of focus that you will have. It's more forgiving, but at the cost of the compactness of the size of the binocular. So why are we discussing this? What does it really mean in terms of the image that you see? Well, very often you may find people think that more is better, as in more power. But in reality, if you have a lower power optic, you will have less need to hunt through your focus range to get your fast moving subjects in sharp focus. So this is critical if you're tracking fast moving subjects, maybe a flock of pigeons, a hobby, house martins darting through, and you're tracking their depth as they fly, then you'll have to make less adjustment with your focus than you would do with a higher power binocular. So 8 and 10 power are very often great choices for bird watching for that reason, and perhaps higher power maybe for necessarily further subjects, coastal watching, or out on the estuary and far out to sea, for example. So to just illustrate the point, this NL Pure 10 by 42, if you focus at about 70 meters away from you, the reality is that you'll have your whole scene in sharp focus from about 15 meters out to infinity. And it has modern coatings, it's super sharp, and has a very wide field of view, as is the characteristic of the NL Pure design line from Swarovski. But if your budget doesn't quite stretch to the NL Pure with that incredible wide field of view, you may find it very comforting to know that the EL 10x42, the stalwart flagship of the optics industry for many, many years, it actually has a slightly greater depth of field. And if you focus at 70 meters with this optic, everything will be in focus from about 10 rather than 15 meters out to infinity. So you have to hunt less and you have more forgiving ease of focusing on the depth of your subject. Now, that's not to say that the NL Pure isn't razor sharp, but you may have to hunt just that little bit more for that superb level of sharpness. So hopefully that's insightful, a little bit of insight in the differences between depth of field and the kind of look that you get with different depth of focus based on the lens count and the optical design system overall. Come and try them out in person in our showroom in Southwest Optics in Torbay. I'm sure you'll find it a really insightful and advantageous experience, and come and see in our viewing lounge where we've got second story views over the valley to put these products really through the test. Thanks very much for watching.